So the scene we've got here is a little bit different to what we ended up with at the end of the last tutorial. We've got the same player character, but he's made up of individual sprites this time. So he's got one for his head, face, hair, body, hands and feet. The assets for this are 8 separate images here set as sprites in the import settings, and then each one of those images is set as the corresponding sprite in each one of these sprite renderers. This setup allows us to move each body part individually, like you to move the head like that, and also move the player as a whole, like so. To create an animation, open up the animation window with Window, Animation, Animation, click your root object, and click this button here for create an animator and an animation clip. I'm going to create a new folder called Animations, and we'll just have an idle animation to start off with. The first animation you create also adds an animator component to your object and creates an animation controller, which is saved in the same directory as your animation that you just created. Your animation controller decides which animation is going to play on your object at any time. For now, it's just going to play our idle animation as we've only got one. The animation window is where we add keyframes to our animation and set our animation up. So if I was to do something like 1 second, if I slightly scale up the player's body to make it look like they're breathing, and then I reset that back to 1 at 2 seconds, and then maybe put a little bit of rotation on the head, like he's breathing in, and again reset that at the end, which will make it loop quite nicely. You can preview your animation by clicking the play button in the animation window, or you can click play in Unity, go into play mode, and that'll start running your animator. Now you know how to create animations. I've just fast forwarded over making 2 more. One for moving, which just moves the player's legs, and another one for jumping, which animates the legs a little bit to give it a bit of a bounce, and moves the full player game object up for the jump and back down to loop. If you open up the animator window by going to Window, Animation, Animator, you can now see the 3 animations that our player can play. So we're going to use this window to set up some nice transitions between them. First we'll look up a transition between idle and move and back again. To set up this transition, if you right click on one state, click Make Transition, and then click again on the second state that you want to transition to. You can inspect your transition by clicking on it, which opens up this window. If you tick this Has Exit Time field, this transition will only occur when the first animation is this percentage of the way through playing. So you'd only move from the idle state to the move state when the idle state is 87% of the way through. If we're creating transitions to go from idle to move and back again when the player's moving and not, this Has Exit Time field is not enough information to be able to do that. We're going to have to create a parameter for that. So we'll create a parameter called something like walking, create a bool, something that could be on and off, and we can say we'll move from the idle state to the move state. If the walking bool is true, we no longer want the exit time, so the idle state can be at any percentage of the way through, and we'll move to the move state, providing that the walking parameter is true. And we'll just do the inverse of that to go back from move to idle. We'll say that where walking is false, no exit time, we'll go back. So we'll need to set this parameter in a script. We've got a component attached to the player container, the player controller. If we open that up, our script at the moment just moves the character left when the left arrow key is pressed and to the right when the right arrow key is pressed. We can grab our reference to the animator inside the start function and cache it off into the class by using the getComponent function. This function looks at the current game object that our component is attached to and tries to find this component that was specified on it, tries to find the animator on the player container object. In our update function, we can then set a bool on this animator Just set walking to be true if the player's moving either left or right, and if he's walking either way, just set that to be false. So as you can see now, it's in the idle state. When he's moving, his legs move, we transition to that state, back in idle when we're not walking, and on and off like that. Great, now let's make our player jump. We've set up a player using a container object, meaning we can let our animator take control of the player transform underneath, and we can take control of the container. So if both you and the animator are trying to take control of the same game object, the same transform, you won't get the result you want. They'd both be fighting. So rather than use a bool for jump, we'll use a trigger. A trigger is consumed by the animator if a transition requires it, and then it's reset. So if you set the jump trigger and a transition requires that jump trigger is then reset afterwards. This makes sense for a jump because you want the player to jump once when you tell him to, not carry on jumping forever. Now you create a trigger in the same way as you would a bool, add a parameter trigger, and we'll call it jump. Another little difference is we'll set up the transition to jump state a little differently. We want to be able to jump at any time, so we'll transition from any state to jump. So no matter if we're in idle or move, we'll come straight into jump if the jump trigger is set. When our jump animation is nearing completion, we'll also want to transition back to idle or to move, depending on a couple of things. So going back to idle, you want to make sure that enough of our jump animation has played, something like 70% of the animation is played before we start transitioning back to idle, and also that the walking bool is false. Similarly, for going back to move, we want the same exit time to make sure enough of our jump animation is played and that walking is true. To set that trigger up, we could just say something like if input.getKeyDown, which will return true just during the frame that this key is clicked, keycode.spacebar, and on the animator again we'll set a trigger this time, the jump trigger. So if you test this, looking good. So this all works great apart from one little bug. As soon as our jump trigger is consumed, we can set it again in our script. So we can tell our player to jump whilst he's already in the air, which kind of queues up a second jump before he's even hit the ground. We can fix that by adding in checks for what the current animation state is, or what the next animation state is if we're transitioning to it. So we want the current state to either be idle or move, or the state that we're transitioning to be either idle or move if we're going to trigger a jump. So now you can move around and jump as you'd expect. That is the basics of animation using Unity's built-in system. There's a link to the GitHub repo for this tutorial in the description if you'd like to explore further. The next video in the series looks into creating prefabs and using the resources folder to create some obstacles for our player to avoid. Thanks for watching.